A big jump for the Falcons O-line led to a big jump and a win in week 2.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers of this pod, that make it your first listen each and every day. And become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about how much of a different team this Falcons team looked in week 2 in their thrilling Monday night win over the Philadelphia Eagles, and talk with our guest about who he thinks are the biggest catalysts for that improvement. And our guest is none other than my former co-host, Allen Strk, who covers the Falcons for the Falcoholic and was covering the Falcons last night in Philadelphia. In the locker room, we'll pick Allen's brain on some of the insights that he had being in the stadium on Monday Night Football. But Allen, my friend, welcome back to Locked On Falcons.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here. I think I have a new AKA. Could I let the audience know?
Okay.
Thanks to the Eagles communications team last night, posted a picture on Twitter. They spelt my last name S-K-R-T. So Allen Strk was my name, and that's the first time it's ever been spelled like that. So if you want to add that for my new AKA, Allen Strk would be something that I think would be a great addition.
Okay.
If we could get Offset to do the ad lib, Quavo, I think it would fit really nicely. That was one of the many highlights of my experience in Philadelphia. I've had a lot of fun times in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, it's usually resulted in the Falcons losing on the final possession because they couldn't score in the red zone. But wow, our fortunes have changed, and that was quite the game.
Absolutely. So when we talk about some of the players that stepped up big, in week 2, it feels like we got to start talking the conversation about the offensive line. Is that a fair place to start?
Absolutely. They set the tone from the beginning. In particular, Matthew Bergeron and Drew Dalman. I thought, especially when it came to running on, whether it was cutbacks or those gap runs, Bergeron and Dalman really set the tone, whether it was through the combo blocks or, I think Bergeron hit a couple nice seals, and Dalman just seemed to be really involved too. And maybe it kind of benefited because, as we know, the Eagles don't really have linebackers, so maybe somewhat of a favorable matchup, but the Eagles still have a really good front. It's not quite on the level it was 5-6 years ago, but they still have players there. And I just thought Bergeron and Dalman really need those games because, as we know, Bergeron got taken to school, I guess we could say, by Cam Hayward. No shame in that, but Cam Hayward, he pummeled him pretty badly, and Drew Dalman had his breakdowns against Pittsburgh, just like majority of the offensive line. So for those two to really step up and really lead the running game, because the Falcons really need to run the ball, because the last thing you want is to be playing a lot of third and long, especially given the circumstances of Kirk Cousins at the moment, given his health, and just in a hostile environment, because the Eagles crowd, anytime the Eagles are playing on prime time, it's going to be that environment just going to be insane. No one sits down for 3 hours there. So they really need to run the ball and just to silence the crowd and build those long drives. And I thought Bergeron and Dalman did a fantastic job of setting the tone with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, this all summer long, I've been skeptical of the Falcons offensive line because I think they've gotten far too much credit for probably a lot more mediocre play over the last year than I think a lot of people that often hype them up as this top 5 offensive line. And it seemed like that take in week 1 proved to be very accurate. This offensive line is overrated and got kind of pummeled, as you say, by that Steelers front. And you needed them to step up this week against probably a lesser front in the Eagles. It hasn't been as much of a strength as we've seen this Eagles front be in the past, but still they have plenty of playmakers up there. And the Falcons, I think, were able to sort of control the game. Kaleb McGary was another guy that I thought looked like the old Kaleb McGary, just kind of throwing guys out of the club on a couple of those run plays that we've seen him do so often over the last couple of years. And so it was nice to see, especially Bergeron and Dalman, because to me, those were the two guys that, for me, were the two biggest question marks on that offensive line. Can they sort of hold up not only in pass protection, but also in the run game? And I think they did that very well. And Chris Lindstrom, Zach Bonds still could have his nightmares because this man cut Zach Bonds so many times in this game. Like pretty much all of those like 10-plus yard runs that Bijan had in this game or Algier had in this game, it was almost always thanks to Chris Lindstrom climbing to the second level, taking out Zach Bond with a cut block. And that's the thing that makes Chris Lindstrom special when, I don't necessarily consider him to be the best guard in football as like other people do. But if you're going to make a case for him being the best guard in football, it is because of his ability to be that sort of heat-seeking missile on the second level and taking out linebackers and creating those cutback lanes for the running backs. And you saw that fully on display this past Monday night. Another player that stepped up in a major way, and I know you were, pushing his propaganda on this podcast over the summer.
No such thing.
Various appearances was Darnell Mooney. Your boy Darnell Mooney became the big-time playmaker for the Atlanta Falcons on Monday night.
Like as I like to say, he's a roller coaster ride, but he's worth the price of admission. You could talk about sometimes he struggles to create separation against press coverage. Times where he doesn't continue running his route on a rare accurate throw downfield by Kirk Cousins. He has his faults, but he provides that juice, and you saw it last night, especially after the catch. I don't remember him being this lethal after the catch. Like the way he broke a couple of tackles, super impressive. We know C.J. Gardner-Johnson's enforced those, so to put C.J. Gardner-Johnson on his highlight reel like that and then end off with a flip, it's just one of those moves where I think you want to have that attitude with your receiving corps. Like we look at some of the top Falcons receiving corps over years, like Mohamed Sanu, for instance, who is such a beloved figure on this illustrious podcast. Like he played with that attitude that he's going to let defensive backs know, like we're here, we're not backing down. This is a hostile environment, but we're going to make our plays and we're going to let you know about it. Darnell Mooney that time, because the first half, him and Cousins, I don't know if they weren't on the same page, but Mooney was getting visibly frustrated. There was one hitch route where Cousins threw it really low, but Mooney probably should have caught it. And then if you remember against Pittsburgh, Cousins threw a deep corner to Mooney, and it was a little inside his shoulder, but Mooney probably should have caught it. It kind of went through his hands. But once again, Cousins really didn't lead him, and those two just have not really connected all that well. So for them to really get going in the second half, and of course on the following drive, 2 plays of over 20 yards, it was a huge moment. And I think Mooney's going to provide that huge vertical threat, but I think he's also proven that he could do some damage after a catch, and I think that's what the Falcons need because they sorely lacked it last year.
Absolutely. So, you talk a little bit about Kirk Cousins and Mooney not being on the same page. I do want to pick your brain, Allen, on what did you think of Kirk Cousins' improvement from week 1 to week 2, as well as Zac Robinson, who were the two people, at least on this podcast, that we would spend pretty much the entire week talking about. So I want to pick your brain on that, as well as see, if anybody sort of stepped up for you on the defensive side of the ball. And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, scheduling can be a hassle in today's hectic world. Maybe you're stuck in Lincoln Financial Field and you're just, been there all night and wondering where you can get a bite to eat late in the evening. And that's where DoorDash, right? You don't have to worry about that. That's your on-demand food delivery app. While, I'm worried about scheduling, when I can eat between podcasts. You might be scheduling when you can eat when you come from games or whatever, right? Or you're just trying to get your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks ready to go. Download the DoorDash app, order your game day favorites to find those, and make sure you use the promo code LOCKEDFALL24. That's LOCKEDFALL24, and you'll get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. And guys, I want to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because they still have that great offer, just a few days left, where through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with that YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. And all you need is a Google account or a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And while you're there, go check out the lines for the upcoming Week 3 Sunday night matchup, where the Falcons will be hosting the Kansas City Chiefs. The line opened up at the Chiefs being favored by 4.5 points. Well, that Falcons momentum has moved that line now to 3.5 points, where the Falcons are 3.5-point favorite underdog, or not favorite, underdogs. And so go check it out. Do you feel like the Falcons can shock the world? You feeling great about the Falcons, or you feel like, they'll fall back down to earth? All you got to do is head on over to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So continuing today's conversation with Allen Strk of the Falcoholic, and we're talking about the guys that stepped up big in Week 2 compared to Week 1. And Allen, we talked about the offensive line, we talked about Darnell Mooney, but what about the guys that were designing the game plan for that offensive line and the guy making the pass to Darnell Mooney? What were your thoughts on Kirk Cousins and Zac Robinson's improvement, or do you not feel like it was a whole lot different from what you saw in Week 1?
Oh, it was different from the first snap. They went under center. Did you think I mentioned this? Did you think given that the first 3 plays were under center, play action as well, did it remind you of when Kyle Shanahan against the Colts, the 3 plays of Roddy White to start the game, where it's just like, all right, media, you can go all week talking about how we're not under center, or give it to you right now. Kirk Cousins could actually move his feet, move his body, and we're going to actually run an offense that isn't going to be solely relying on playing out of shotgun and pistol.
Well, it didn't remind me of the Roddy White situation, because basically after that first series, Kyle Shanahan didn't call any plays for Roddy White after that point, and in this game they kept going under center and doing all the things that they were doing in that first series. So it didn't quite remind me of, that was more a situation where Kyle was being petty. And I think Zac Robinson wasn't being petty. He was just being smart, being like, oh, let's run the offense that everybody thought the Falcons were going to run this year with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. Well said. And I definitely want to get your thoughts on Zac Robinson, because I know you were very critical of his play calling against Pittsburgh, but I thought he did a fantastic job. Of course, there were some blemishes in the red zone, but I think some of that could be attributed to Cousins' lack of decisiveness. But I love the personnel groupings. He's starting to use more condensed splits. We're seeing a common trend where it's like McLeod, Mooney, and Pitts, and then London isolate on the right. I would like to see maybe London and Pitts be bunched together, kind of create a couple of rub route concepts, or just use their physical frame in a condensed area like the red zone. You saw Arthur Smith do that a bit in 2022. I think they could go back to that. But overall, great mix between the run and pass. I like that they got Algier more involved, even though Bijan was fantastic. I think Algier, in that type of environment where you want to control the ball and silence the crowd, Algier is just that physical presence that the Falcons were getting so many yards after contact, and given that they were getting to the second level so often, it just made sense to play Algier more. So I love that decision. Yeah, just other than the red zone, I thought the Falcons offense played a relatively efficient game, and they were really moving the ball. And you saw on that final drive what Robinson was doing, just attacking the outside the numbers. And it seems like Mooney, that deep corners, just seems to be working time and time again. Even though the plays haven't necessarily always led to completions, the opening's there. And I think that's just something that they could continue to exploit, and when it comes to going against defenses. So yeah, Zac Robinson, I think lots of encouragement. I didn't think he was that bad against Pittsburgh, but of course, when you're relying on pretty much 2 formations, there's going to be plenty of criticism, and of course, not having any plan to contain TJ Watt. We saw him now use a little bit more max protect formations, and just provide Kirk Cousins with more protection, because there were times Cousins would stay in the pocket and it just felt like 4 or 5 seconds, and wow, look how much a week could change things.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways Zac Robinson improved on pretty much everything I wanted to see him improve upon. Initially I was like, they're still running maybe a little bit too much on second and long, but at the same time, I think given how soft Vic Fangio with the boxes are, and basically it's just like they're conceding 4 or 5 yards on second and long or whatever, so might as well take advantage of that in those situations. So for me, like basically my only complaints were like would basically be nitpicking, where it's like I wish instead of running it 5 times on second and long, maybe you should only run it 3 times. But again, that's really nitpicky. And I think with what you saw from Kirk Cousins, you saw his improvement in the second half. It did feel like the team made some adjustments in the second half. You even saw Kyle Pitts' chipping be a lot more effective this week. It felt like that was something that the Falcons went back and say, okay, this is how you do this in this situation. And you saw, I think, Pitts be a more effective blocker. He still wasn't a good blocker in this game, but a more effective blocker with how the Falcons are using it. And that sort of trending in that direction to me is very promising. I don't think the Falcons are the fully formed entity on offense or defense that we hope that they will be by the end of this season. But if they can continue this kind of progress that they showed from week 1 to week 2 and continue that progress over the coming weeks, I think this team, by the time we get to October and November, I think you could see a really, really good football team that lives up to, I think, a lot of the expectations that people had going into this year for the Falcons.
Yeah, well said. There was a lot of roster turnover, even though you see a lot of the core pieces still here. It's still, when you get a new coaching staff, new quarterback, a couple more new playmakers, it's going to be, it's going to take time to adjust. And given that, I was speaking to Drake London about this, just the fact that these teams aren't really playing preseason, like London admitted against Pittsburgh, he was struggling a bit with the pace of the game. So I think these teams refusing to play starters in preseason has left a bit of a lingering effect when it comes to their early season effectiveness.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see on that. I was just thinking about like the Bengals, and everybody makes a big deal about how like they're like 1-9 in like September under Zach Taylor or whatever, and they don't play guys in the preseason. And it's like, maybe they should switch it up because they always start the season slow. And so we only have 1 year of this with Raheem, but it is something that is at least an interesting conversation topic when you talk about some of the McVay disciples. Like clearly the Rams, this year, but that's more injuries related, but most years the Rams have no problem starting the season strong. And then the Vikings obviously are getting off to a pretty good start this year as well. So it's not
Packers in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, it just kind of depends on the team, I guess you could say, when it comes to the whole preseason and getting guys ready. And probably the individual, as you pointed out with Drake London, where it's like certain guys probably could use, a series or 2 in the preseason to get ready for the regular season. But that will be a conversation that we can have next August. I want to conclude today's episode by talking more about the Falcons defense and talking about, if they showed improvement that you wanted to see, or maybe they're still a work in progress and we're hoping to see more from them, coming in week 3. But, there is a player that I do think did step up from week 1 to week 2 on the defense side of the ball. That is AJ Terrell. So we'll get Alan's thoughts on AJ Terrell's improvement in this game and how much of that was tied to not having to cover AJ Brown in this game. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, if you're trying to get back into the stadium, whether you're trying to see your beloved Atlanta Falcons or the Atlanta Braves or really any sporting event, well, it's not just sports, comedy, music, theater, that's all available to you with Game Time. They are taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. And my favorite feature with Game Time is the seat views, right? That panoramic seat view where you know exactly what you're getting before you even walk into the stadium. And the other thing I love about Game Time is they're all in prices, which means you don't have to worry about hidden fees coming at you feel like you're getting a deal, and then all of a sudden they slap on all these different fees at checkout, and you're like, well, this is not saving me nearly as much money as I thought it was. But you don't have to worry about that with Game Time. And so if you want to take advantage of all of these features that Game Time has, just download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons here with Allen Strk of the Falcoholic. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL as your second listen. Check out tomorrow's first listen here on Locked On Falcons. We'll be breaking down the All-22 from Monday night's matchup. Will be your next listen here on this illustrious podcast. But Alan, let's talk a little bit about the defense. Now, I was very critical of the defense, or I wouldn't say very critical, but I was a lot more critical of the defense than I was of the offense in my rapid reaction on Monday night. And going back through the film, it does feel like the defense is a work in progress at this point in time. They certainly, I think, did enough for the Falcons to win the game, but it did feel like maybe the Eagles made some, untimely mistakes. I'm thinking of this Saquon Barkley drop that probably could have potentially iced the game if he had caught that ball at the end. But I want to talk about one defensive player that did stand out after a rough week one was AJ Terrell. What were your thoughts on AJ Terrell's week 2 performance? And do you think a lot of that was just tied to not having to cover AJ Brown, or were there other aspects of AJ Terrell's game that you thought improved?
Oh, that certainly helped because, as we know, Terrell's kind of his Achilles heel is bigger receivers when you look at Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins in the past. But I saw Terrell was really anticipating those short to intermediate passes. Like, you saw him closing down on a lot of tackles, and he made them every single time, and he forced the Eagles into those third and mediums or even third and longs. Like, it just seemed like he was very sound in terms of his positioning and his overall tackling technique. And it might not sound a lot, but if you watch the Falcons tackle against the Eagles, you got to appreciate that Terrell was one of the few that actually tackled consistently. So, and I thought the times that he matched against Devontae Smith, he pretty much stayed in his hip pocket. So, very encouraging there. I think look, what happened with Pickens, it was just a couple of plays. I don't think it was anything extreme. Like, George Pickens makes a lot of corners look silly or look, at least beats them. So I'm not overly concerned about Terrell, but I think the most encouraging part was just Terrell's his positioning, his anticipation when it came to just whether the Eagles are running, short hitches or they're running drag routes, running mesh. Just Terrell seemed to be there time and time again to make those key tackles to put the Eagles in third and medium or third and long.
Yeah. It felt like watching the game live, like pretty much anytime the Eagles put Devontae Smith in the slot, he did good work. He had the touchdown where it was Caden Ellis. There was a couple of times where it seemed like he was able to beat D. Alford a couple of times. And part of me wonders, like, maybe Falcons should have been a little bit more opening to Terrell shadowing Devontae Smith a little bit more all across the field. And maybe he would have had a less impactful game. But I think certainly AJ stepped up. Now, someone who didn't quite step up, who I am also a big fan of on this podcast, or at least a vocal defender of this player, that's Troy Andersen. What were your thoughts on Troy Andersen, basically being the full-time linebacker, no longer splitting reps with Nate Land?
He just struggled to get off blocks, seemed to be out of position time and time again. It seemed like anytime the Eagles are running, particularly up the middle, he was going to the wrong gap. It just seemed like he was out of position constantly. And people talk about the missed tackle on Barkley, but it's just when you're replacing someone like Nate Landman, who's known for his discipline, his composure, intelligence, play recognition. Like, these are the hard things to live up to. I do wish the Falcons used Andersen more on blitzes, even though Hurts kind of punished them. It's just the blitzes were so ineffective, whether it was Alford or Simmons or even Bates. Like, they could have used the linebackers a little more, because at least with Andersen's speed, it could have at least caused some havoc there, and at least would be closer to the line of scrimmage. But overall, I just wish Andersen his entire game pretty much. Like, I don't want to be too critical, but it's just when you're in that position going against someone like Hurts and Barkley, just the endless possibilities they create. You have to be disciplined. You have to, kind of be sound in your gap integrity, and it just wasn't that. And it's kind of funny, Aaron. We always joke about this, but like in the August podcast, wherever you listen to, or even after the week one, like, you heard podcast talking about how the Eagles' design runs with quarterbacks has been very ineffective. Like, it's become to a point where it's a liability for them. They consistently lose yards on it. They play the Falcons, and it turns out to be one of the most productive plays. So I do think Troy Andersen was a significant reason for that. So, he's going to have to step up now because Landman's on IR.
Fair. I think it's fair to criticize Andersen. I don't think he had the performance that I wanted to see him have. I would generally push back a little bit on the Falcons missed Nate Landman, because I don't know if Nate Landman would have had as big an impact on this specific game and this specific matchup as maybe people assume, because I went back and looked at it, and I think a lot of the Eagles' success running the football, especially with Barkley, was them getting the Falcons in nickel and getting them in soft boxes that we were referring to earlier with Fangio. And, we saw in week one, Nate Landman wasn't really getting any of the snaps in the nickel situation when the Falcons had, 5 DBs or more on the football field. And they were basically in nickel, I think, like 70-75% of this game. So Nate Landman was only playing really in base defense. And then when the Falcons were in base defense, they did a pretty good job keeping Barkley contained, I think if my math is correct, I think he had like 9 carries for 18 yards on those base defensive snaps. So averaging about 2.0 yards per carry. And then I think doing the math on the rest of it, I think it was like 13 carries for like 77 yards. It was like averaging 6 yards a carry. So basically, like, that was a lot of their success. And I don't think Landman would have made a difference in the QB run game with Jalen Hurts, because I don't think if Troy Andersen is not making those plays, and I don't think Nate Landman is making those plays, running a 4.9 versus a 4.4, whatever it is. So, like, I think absolutely Troy Andersen did not play well. I'm not going to sit here and be like, Troy played great. No, he did not play great, but I did see a lot of people, I think maybe even you, Alan, on Twitter, being like, the Falcons sorely miss Nate Landman. And I'm just like, I'm going to push back on that. But at the same time, I am the resident Nate Landman hater. So I guess, I'm a little biased on that.
Don't you think he at least clean things up, and that gives the coaching staff an option? Like, they see Andersen notably struggling, they can at least put Landman in there in nickel situation. And it's not like the Eagles have too many playmakers that could stretch the field given A.J. Brown's absence. So I would say at least the coaches have the option to at least put Landman in there. So
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. It's just, for me, like, I think Nate Landman is really good taking on blocks, but at the same time, I don't know if he's beating Lane Johnson or Landon Dickerson in the hole.
That's fine. Look, I'm not saying he's gonna like get a bunch of TFLs and force the Eagles to run 3.5 yards per carry, but I just think he could at least clean things up and prevent them from constantly getting 8 to 10 yards, which they were doing in the first half. I just think
that's fair.
There are moments he could at least just cleaned up the mess that was being created. So that's my defense. And but I totally understand. Look, these guys have like limitations, and credit to the Eagles, they really execute those signature runs with Hurts, whether it was read option or whatever they were doing. It just it's been a long time coming for them, because it's been so ineffective for them, particularly last year. But look, maybe Kellen Moore's unlocking something. I know Kellen Moore is getting a lot of criticism. I heard within the first 10 minutes of being there, at least 7 Eagle fans yell, "Run the ball!" But hey, at least they got Hurts going.
Yeah. Well, they ran the ball pretty well, so they
got away from it though.
Yeah, no, that's fair. If I'm an Eagle fan, I probably
with Kellen Moore.
Less issues with Kellen Moore and more with Vic Fangio, but it is what it is. But, okay. Any other thoughts that you want to share, Alan, before we get out of here from that week 2 game? Whether it's talking about how players were reacting in the locker room, or any other observations from the game that you want to share.
We can talk a little defense, but especially the fourth quarter, it just seemed like they were steps slow. Like when Barkley was in motion multiple times, and the Falcons did pay for it, just seemed like they weren't reacting. Maybe because they were playing more zone than man, but it just seemed Barkley in motion. It seemed like they were a step behind when it was clear he was the primary target on that particular play. Besides that, I think you want to see more from the interior line. Besides Gray Jarrett, I don't think any of them have played particularly well so far this season. In particular, on Yamada, not really getting off blocks, not really, commanding that space to create, openings for players around them. And I think Eddie Goldman kind of started strong against Pittsburgh, but he didn't really do much yesterday. Then Street, he continues to get steps. He's not doing much. So I think the Falcons' interior line was a big part of their success last year, and so far, besides Gray Jarrett, they've been relatively disappointing, and I just think now they really got to step it up, especially going against the Chiefs offensive line. That's one of the top units, at least interior in the league. I know they got issues at tackle position, totally understand, but that Chiefs interior is to me one of the best units in the league. So, or groupings, I should say.
Yes.
So, I think the interior line, just in general, besides Gray Jarrett, definitely needs to elevate their game. Besides, just the overall feeling in the locker room. I have never seen a Falcons locker room that loud in my life. It felt like a club inside there. You go in there and it's like Kodak black blasting, a little baby gun. Like it was like a Atlanta party, and it just for so long, it's Atlanta. It hasn't been a party. There hasn't been much to celebrate. So seeing those players just totally jovial, dancing around, just it's 12:30 at night, and they're all willing to do interviews. It usually is not the case. I've covered my fair share of Falcon primetime games, and most of them are leaving out the door. I'll never forget Tevin Coleman saying "No, sir" to me when I was trying to get an interview. And then Brooks Reed just shaking his head at me when I try to interview him. So it's always going to players win. And, speaking to guys like Jesse Bates, Darnell Mooney, Drake London, giving me a lot of great insight into what went to their comeback win and just, how they reacted from the Pittsburgh defeat, because you could tell it was a bit of a punch in the jaw they took. All those players are really frustrated about how that game didn't go to plan. They felt that Pittsburgh outplayed them, outpowered them. So the fact that they came to a real hostile environment and got this win, it was really uplifting for them. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. And they're also measured as well. As excited as they were, they kept reiterating, we're ready for Kansas City. We can't wait for Kansas City. And we're not going to celebrate this too long. So they're focused on making another statement in prime time. And they got opportunities coming up, Super Bowl champs against the Chiefs. And that Thursday night game against Tampa all of a sudden looks pretty compelling. And we know how well Tampa's playing. So it's exciting, just the fact that the Falcons aren't just going to be playing competitive football, but these are games I think everyone's going to be anticipating. And we hopefully get some more thrilling performances. And just, I think the Falcons always maintain a pretty healthy locker room, but now it's just there's things to look forward to. It's not just coach talk. It's not just player talk. Like, yeah, we got each other's back. It's not like this team really expects to compete with the best in the NFC.
Yeah, I think that's great points, and we'll see what they do. I think these next 3 games against Kansas City, the Saints, Bucks are really going to help really kind of continue to define their season. I was doing the research before we recorded, and I was like, the last time the Falcons were 1-1 was 2019 to start a season. They've been 0-2 or 2-0 pretty much every other year since then. And they beat the Eagles.
I hate this 2019 comparison because I thought that team was severely flawed. I did not have high hopes for that team. I think this team is significantly better than the 2019 team.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? I don't want to.
I hope so. I hope it is. But to me, what stood out doing that research was they lost 6 straight games. Like everybody was celebrating that Sunday night win with Julio making the play at the end of the game, and then they lost 6 straight games, and it was just like their season was over. And so I want to see this team. I bring that up because I want to see this team, take care of business these next 3 games against some really good teams, right? And we'll get to kind of see them measure themselves against the best team in the league in Kansas City in prime time, and then we'll get 2 sort of critical division games, and the Falcons can sort of reshape the narrative on how tight this division race is if they can come away, starting their division, 2-0, and then possibly 3-0. With the Panthers coming in weeks 6 or so. So, this next month is going to be really important for the season. So I bring up the 2019 team, not to say that this team is that, but I'm just sitting here saying these next couple of games will really have a dramatic impact on their season if they go, either the way that we want them to go or they don't go the way that we want them to go. So I think it will be very fascinating to sort of see the resiliency of this football team and their ability, whether they continue to make those improvements and make that progress, or do we look back at this game, a month from now and being like, oh yeah, remember that one? You remember the whole Duke Riley dancing in the locker room? That didn't age particularly well, but we'll see how this team goes. But Alan, my friend, let the people know some of the stuff that you're working on as we close out today's Locked On Falcons.
Allen Strk, that's ALLENSTRK. Early this morning, I had interviews to go up with Jesse Bates, Drake London, Darnell Mooney. 3 awesome conversations. I definitely recommend you check that out. I will have a piece coming up aiming for Thursday. Unfortunately, I have computer problems right now, but I'm going to work around it. I definitely want to write about the Falcons running game because I really think that is the biggest reason why they beat the Eagles. It really helped them, put together those long drives. And so far, I think the running game has probably been the best thing about through the first 2 games. I think the running game has relatively been strong. So I'm going to write about that. And I'll be doing pretty much every game this year, post-game shows with Kevin Knight, Falcaholic Live. So that's something that I'm looking to get into the rhythm of doing. So it's football season, and we're here. So I'm thrilled and a lot to be looked forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be talking with you, Alan, after a win rather than a loss. So I appreciate you giving me the time. So we'll see if we can link back up later this season and see where the Falcons are at. That's going to do it for us guys here. Make sure you check out Locked On Falcons, Locked On NFL, Locked On Sports Atlanta as your first, second, and third listens. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.